Mises is not mainly a natural rights philosopher. He does not defend laissez-faire by claiming property is sacred in a metaphysical sense. He defends it because private property, exchange, prices, profit and loss, and free contracting are the only framework that makes rational economic calculation and large-scale social cooperation possible. Mises argues that freedom is not just morally attractive, it is economically necessary. Without private ownership and market prices, society loses the ability to calculate, coordinate, and sustain prosperity. He begins from human action. Individuals choose, value, exchange, and plan. Society is not a unified mind, but a network of acting individuals. The market emerges from their interactions and produces prices that reflect scarcity and demand. When government overrides this process through controls, planning, or socialization, it damages the signals that make coordination possible. So Mises's argument is stronger than markets are efficient. The market is the only system under which a complex economy can be rationally organized without blind guesswork. Once you abandon private property in exchange, you don't just lose freedom, you lose the mechanism by which society knows what it is doing. Economic calculation requires market prices for the means of production, and those prices require private ownership and exchange. Without them, you can issue commands, but you cannot know whether resources are used well or wasted. This shifts the debate from ideology to structure. How do we know whether steel should go into railroads, housing, or machines? Only market prices allow that comparison. 1. Individual action is the foundation. The individual is not a tool of the system. The system exists because individuals act. 2. The market is cooperation, not chaos. The free market is disciplined cooperation without a master, enabling peaceful coordination under the division of labor. 3. Property enables calculation. Property is not decorative. It makes economic reasoning possible. Without it, civilization becomes non-calculable. 4. Profit and loss are feedback. Profit signals value creation. Loss signals waste. Without them, the system loses its ability to correct itself. 5. Intervention is unstable. Each intervention distorts the market, creating problems that justify further intervention. It does not balance markets. It progressively replaces them. 6. Economic control is life control. Control over production, wages, and exchange becomes control over how individuals live. 7. Liberalism replaces plunder with exchange. Instead of gaining through force, people advance by serving others through production and trade. 8. Socialism is structurally blind. Without markets and capital goods, there are no real prices, and without prices there is no rational allocation. Socialism cannot calculate. 9. Bureaucracy cannot replace markets. A bureaucracy can enforce rules, but cannot discover whether a plan makes sense economically. 10. Equality of outcome requires coercion. To equalize results, the state must override voluntary choices and interfere unequally in people's lives. 11. Consumer sovereignty. In markets, producers answer to consumers. Under socialism, they answer to planners. 12. Rejection of paternalism. Mises rejects the idea that individuals must be controlled for their own good. Intervention replaces choice with compulsion and judgment with authority. Mises versus the socialist mindset. Mises rejects the idea that society should be organized around a single imposed purpose, whether equality, security, or collective good. The socialist view assumes that society has one proper goal. Rulers can direct resources toward it, and individuals must be subordinated. In Mises's view, individuals have different goals. No authority can coordinate them rationally, and that coercive planning destroys the price system. The real question is not what should society make people do, but what institutions allow people to cooperate without economic blindness. Freedom versus security. Mises supports law, property, and peace, but rejects managed security that overrides markets. Security is legitimate only if it preserves voluntary cooperation. When it becomes control over others' labor and choices, it becomes anti-liberal. He does not oppose government, only government that tries to run the economy. As far as property, money, and individuality, Mises does not ground property in metaphysics, but treats it as essential to personal agency, independent decision-making, and participation in economic life. Money is even more critical. It allows comparison across different uses and makes economic calculation possible. Without property, individuals lose independence. Without prices, society loses economic reason. Capitalism versus socialism. Capitalism is private property, exchange, prices, calculation, profit and loss, and adaptation. Socialism has no market in capital goods, no real prices, no calculation, and administrative guesswork. Even brilliant planners lack the necessary tool of economic calculation. Mises argues socialism justifies control through moral claims where planners decide what is fair. Individuals are treated as incapable and decisions are centralized. Socialism does not just redistribute wealth, it redistributes decision-making. It replaces self-direction for supervision and responsibility for management. Mises's central claim is that laissez-faire is not just morally preferable. It is the only system that allows society to think clearly. Markets generate the prices that make rational coordination possible. Intervention and socialism destroy that process. So the real issue is not just freedom versus control. It is calculation versus blindness, choice versus command, individual action versus imposed design. Murray Rothbard builds a unified system that fuses natural rights philosophy with Austrian economics into a radical defense of individual sovereignty and a total rejection of coercive political authority. Starting from the premise of self-ownership, he argues that each person has an absolute moral claim over his body and labor, which extends to property acquired through homesteading and voluntary exchange, making any initiation of force, whether by individuals or the state, a violation of the non-aggression principle. From this, he concludes that the state, which taxes, regulates, and monopolizes law without genuine consent, is structurally illegitimate, not merely flawed, and that all its functions, law, security, adjudication, could be provided through voluntary, competitive institutions. Economically, Rothbard extends Ludwig von Mises's framework, emphasizing that free markets coordinate society through entrepreneurial action, price signals, and profit and loss feedback, which reflect real consumer preferences and resource scarcities, while intervention distorts these signals, misallocates resources, and compounds inefficiencies. He is especially critical of central banking and inflation, viewing them as hidden forms of wealth transfer and economic manipulation. Against socialism, Rothbard combines moral and structural critique. It violates self-ownership by subordinating individuals to collective control and, as Mises showed, destroys economic calculation by abolishing real prices, leading to systemic irrationality. Against paternalism, he argues that treating individuals as incapable of directing their own lives replaces responsibility with imposed control. His overall vision is that a purely voluntary social order, often called anarcho-capitalism, would maximize both liberty and coordination because it aligns moral legitimacy with economic functionality, like no coercion, full property rights, and a market process that not only allocates resources efficiently, but preserves the individual as an end in himself, rather than a means to political or social goals. Israel Kirzner extends the Austrian tradition by reframing markets not as static systems of equilibrium, but as dynamic processes of discovery driven by entrepreneurial alertness, arguing that the central economic problem is not merely allocating known resources, as in standard models, but uncovering previously unnoticed opportunities that exist because knowledge is dispersed and imperfect. Building on Ludwig von Mises's theory of human action and Friedrich Hayek's insight about decentralized knowledge, Kirzner identifies the entrepreneur as the key coordinating force, not primarily as a risk-taker or capital owner, but as someone alert to price discrepancies, unmet demands, and inefficiencies, whose actions generate profit by correcting errors in the market, and thereby push the system toward greater coordination over time. In this framework, profit is not exploitation, but a signal of discovery, while loss reflects missed or mistaken judgments, making the market a continuous feedback loop that improves itself without central direction. This leads Kirzner to argue that competition is not just price cutting, but an ongoing process of learning and adaptation, where individuals respond to signals and adjust behavior in ways no planner could replicate. His philosophical contribution is therefore to show that ignorance, not perfect knowledge, is the starting condition of economic life, and that institutions like private property, free exchange, and open competition are valuable precisely because they create incentives to discover and use knowledge that does not yet exist in usable form. Conversely, government intervention and socialism are not merely inefficient or coercive, but epistemically destructive, because by distorting prices or removing profit opportunities, they suppress the very discovery process that corrects errors and coordinates society. Kirzner thus deepens the liberal case for markets by demonstrating that freedom is not just about autonomy or efficiency, but about preserving the open-ended process through which individuals uncover, generate, and act on knowledge, making the market the only system capable of turning widespread ignorance into coordinated order without centralized control.